What's up, everybody? Welcome into another live episode of Shout of Buffalo Bills Football Podcast. Ryan, it's felt like we haven't been live in days because we've been doing these position by position preview podcasts where we ask a couple questions and try to answer them the best that we can at each position. Today, we're going a little bit different. We decided to go back to our roots. We're going live today, and we are going to be talking about the entire defense. This will be a little bit of a longer podcast. How are you, my friend?
I am doing great. Afternoon to Mafia for Life in the chat. Looking forward to being live right now, live tomorrow at MafiaCon. We are two busy guys there, Matt Parrino.
We are busy. Tomorrow, MafiaCon, it is going down. Del Reed and the crew have put together this wonderful event. There is stuff to do all day long. I believe it starts at 10, goes all the way to 6 p.m. Ryan Talbot and I will be hosting a live edition of Shout, a Buffalo Bills football podcast at 1:15 live from MafiaCon. So if you're going to be there, make sure you come out, say hello. And also, if you're not going to be there, you can watch it live. So it's going to be pretty awesome.
Yeah, best of both worlds. Looking forward, though. Sold out in terms of tickets. It was announced today, so it should be a great time.
Speaking of live shows, Ryan, while we're on the subject, August 4th, the date and the event page are in the description below. We're going to be out at Dorado on Park Ave in Rochester. Tail end of training camp. Wingnuts is coming out. They're going to be cooking chicken wings. They're bringing a ton. Everybody's going to be able to eat wings, eat delicious food inside Dorado. The Mexican menu is to die for. They have the drink specials. They have the mixed drinks. It's going to be just a wonderful evening, day, really. It's going to be an extravaganza out there at Dorado.
Yeah, cannot wait to be in Rochester for training camp and for Dorado, Wingnuts, and a lot of Bills talk.
All right, so let's get into the defense. And I think it would only be fitting to start on the defensive line because we've been talking about this being a position group, specifically the edge rusher spot, not so much defensive tackle, that is a little bit of a question mark. So I think the best place to start, we've voiced our questions for this position, but I want to know from you, who do you think are going to be the players? And I'll kind of get into this as well. Who do you think are the players that are going to carry this defensive line that, maybe we get to halfway through the season or the end of the year and you're going to say, this guy was a stud and really helped mitigate some of the concerns that we have for the defensive line heading into training camp?
I think it would have to be Greg Rousseau. I mean, you already know what you have on the interior in Ed Oliver after a breakout season last year. You know what Daquan Jones can do in terms of when he's healthy, but I don't know if we've seen that next step from Greg Rousseau yet, and I'm kind of predicting that he takes it this year. Again, takes that Ed Oliver leap where we've seen a lot of solid play from Rousseau. He has become outstanding in terms of run defense, but I want to see him take that next step in terms of getting after the quarterback. And whether it's bad luck with some injuries, he's dealt with some lower body injuries, some that we haven't known about in season. We found out more after the season, some that we do know he's on the injury report with. But he's someone that, if he can stay healthy this year, I think he puts it all together. That size, that power, he's been in the league now quite a while. His pass rush arsenal has grown. This is the year that the Bills need him to take off to mitigate some of those concerns.
So to me, the player who I think mitigates all the problems is on the interior. And I think that Ed Oliver is a guy going into this season who's poised for a breakout campaign. You look at his ability last year to take his game to the next level, of course, with some of the advanced metrics, right? Like the pressure rate, the total pressures leading throughout the season. We've covered the fact that we thought he kind of fell off a little bit, but 9.5 sacks for a guy that played 16 games, who mainly stayed healthy. I think 12, 13, 14 sacks, like that's the kind of season on the interior with a healthy Daquan Jones, with a little bit more help on the interior with guys like Austin Johnson coming over from the Chargers, the drafting of Dwayne Carter. I'm expecting Ed Oliver to have a huge contribution. And I like Ed Oliver's vibes. Like I think that he's a guy that proved a lot about who he is when he goes out and gets paid that massive contract and then has his career season on the other end of it. Because a lot of guys, they're working their way to getting paid, and then it's kind of like, all right, man, I've arrived. I'm setting it on cruise control. He's got a chip on his shoulder. I'm sure he's hearing the fact that things fell off a little bit for this defensive line in the playoffs. And that's an area where I'm looking for him to carry the boat, be the driver of the ship, if you will, and help bring along a lot of those other guys. And to your point, I think it's really a safe bet to have Greg Rousseau be a guy that we're talking about at the end of the season. But I think Ed Oliver can have a big impact on Rousseau and his ability to take that next step. And that's why I'm kind of putting him at the forefront in terms of who I think we're going to be talking about star power wise at the end of the season.
And that makes a lot of sense. Listen, Ed Oliver elevated his game last year. And what really impressed me is what he did after DaQuan Jones went down with injury in that Jacksonville game. He was playing really well in those first few weeks. And when Jones went down, he said, oh, is that going to affect Ed Oliver? And it really didn't. And when you look at the talent around Ed Oliver last year on the defensive tackle spot, there were a lot of guys who just didn't contribute the way that the Bills probably thought. Jordan Phillips was not the same player that he once was. Tim Settle never really panned out the way the Bills likely planned. They have bolstered their defensive tackle depth, their talent. I really do think that he's going to be able to shine this year. And with the boost in talent around him in that defensive tackle room, I think that Ed Oliver could even take another step this season after an outstanding year last year.
We take a look at the depth chart here, Ryan. Greg Rousseau, Dwayne Smoot, left defensive end. This is just like the early projection. Casey Toohill, Cameron Klein. And then you look at the right defensive end, AJ Epinesa, Von Miller. I'd probably flip those. Miller probably ends up being the starter for them. We'll see. But that would be huge. I mean, if AJ Epinesa has such a great summer and passes over Von Miller, and you could turn Von Miller, especially at the early part of the season, into a little bit more of that second wave situational kind of player to really kind of like help close games, that would be huge. And I think AJ Epinesa, to a degree, is going to be given that opportunity because of the contract that he signed. You got Javon Solomon, the rookie, listed as third here over on our lads. Kingsley Jonathan at fourth. A couple of UDFAs in the mix there. Who would you say of that group that maybe you're higher on or lower on than the general consensus, whether it be from the media or from the fan base?
Well, maybe just with that first depth chart that you just read off, I think it may be a little bit lower on Smoot. Did you say they had him listed as the second team?
Yeah.
Listen, I hope he is healthy. I hope he's back to 100%. If he is, I may be proven wrong on that. But he didn't look like the type of player that he once was in Jacksonville when he was accumulating 5 to 7 sacks per season on average. If the Bills can get that player in here in terms of the second team defensive end or edge rusher position, that's going to bolster this line significantly. But I'm just not there yet with him. I want to see what he looks like at training camp before I get too high on him. I really think they might have to lean heavily on those top three, that being Rousseau, Epinesa, and Von Miller to get after the quarterback. And I'm not sure if that's enough. So someone needs to step up. Maybe it's him. Maybe it's Casey Toohill, another guy that I'm iffy on right now. I know he looked pretty good in the spring, but he was a player that that played better last year with limited snaps, where after the Commanders made all of those trades and he had more reps, he kind of struggled on the field. So he's not going to have to play significant reps in Buffalo. Maybe that will benefit him. Maybe he'll play like he was early in the season with the Commanders. I just have a lot of questions about the depth after those top three.
So I think I'm probably, this is cheating a little bit because I'm not going to give you one that I'm higher on or lower on, but I think I'm in line with what I think a lot of people, and maybe skew higher, because I think Javon Solomon can earn a significant role. And by significant role, I mean part of the rotation, because this is going to be a rotational unit, no matter how you kind of dice this thing up. I think Javon Solomon is going to make maybe Kingsley Jonathan expendable a little bit. And the reason I say that is because I'm huge on Kingsley Jonathan. I'm actually surprised that to this stage, we haven't seen him given a little bit more rope in a couple of opportunities that he's received, to see a little bit more from him, just to kind of get an understanding of like, okay, what can he do? You know, we saw Von Miller last year going through a 14-game stretch there where a lot of it wasn't very good. I almost wonder if the Bills, looking back, hindsight being 2020, don't wish that they could have maybe given a a game or two to Kingsley Jonathan just to have that tape to really dive into, because his snap count last year wasn't nearly as high as I thought it was going to be. And that's why I'm not as bullish on him going into this season. He's had 2 years now to try to like crack into the rotation and just hasn't materialized. So now I look at a guy like Javon Solomon, who spent the entire spring flashing that athleticism that I think helped him stand out to the Bills. If you come in here as the fourth guy, you've been at the, studying with Von Miller all off season long. I'm not sure if he was at the summit. I actually would love to learn if he was. I know there were a couple other guys out there. I think Dwayne Carter was out there, if I'm not mistaken, because he was out there.
He was a lot of
Saquon
the
Jones
tackle room. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, if Solomon was out there, whether or not he was, he's already talked about how much he looks up to Von Miller and everything that's going on with that. So I think this could be a massive summer for him. And if he does break through, if he does earn that kind of role going into this season, I think it'd be huge for the Bills, because how many times are we sitting here talking about it at the end of August, them drafting guys in the 5th, 6th, 7th round, cutting them, and then losing them to other teams. I don't know if this is a guy that you want to draft in the 5th round with all this college production and then end up watching him walk out the door.
Yeah, I think they find a way to keep a guy like Javon Solomon on the roster regardless of this summer. But if he can step up, that's a major, boost for this Bills defense, defensive line. I think he would have to be one of those situational pass rushers, obviously, year one, obvious passing downs, 3rd and long, big time moment. And then you put him in maybe with a Von Miller on the edge. You kick Greg Rousseau inside, who has the ability to do that. Have Ed Oliver in there as well. And, those might be your 4 top guys in that situation. A fresh Javon Solomon, a Von Miller that's you hope is returning to form, and then Rousseau and Oliver on the interior that can get after the quarterback, might make life difficult. They do love to rotate their edges, their defensive tackles. So Solomon has a legitimate chance to show what he can do if he can use that speed, that athleticism, the ability to get around the edge like he did at Troy. Then he'll have a role here as a rookie.
T Dobbs in the YouTube comments, I've got a feeling Epinesa might be the surprise breakout. He seems more aggressive than Greg Rousseau. Just my feelings. I'm not going to necessarily disagree with that, but at the same time, I think Greg Rousseau, you got to consider what kind of time of the year you're evaluating. Like if he's playing through the foot injury and you're kind of dinging him for lack of aggressiveness, I think you're kind of trying to mitigate the problems with that injury at times. Like, in games over the last couple of years, I think back 2 seasons ago when Greg Rousseau went up against Kansas City and had that explosive game where I think he had a sack. I think he had an interception in that game as well. That's the Greg Rousseau that I think if you can find and unlock on a consistent basis, that's what you're hoping for. And here's the big problem with both of these guys. More so with Epinesa than Rousseau, because I think if you look at some of the advanced numbers, Rousseau's production is better, but neither one of them have found a consistent level of production at any point in their career. And when I say consistent, I'm talking about an 8-game stretch where you're seeing sacks, when you're seeing pressures, when you're seeing tackles for a loss, however they're contributing into the defense, they're doing it at a high level consistently, game in and game out. Kind of like what Von Miller was in 2022, right? Like he was really delivering there for a stretch of time before the injury. They need one of those guys to take the step to consistency, I think, more than anything else.
Yeah, consistency is key. And I will say, to T Dobbs' credit here in the comments, he has gotten very good at tipping passes. When he knows he's not going to get to the quarterback, Epinesa has shown really good timing in terms of getting his arms up, batting those passes, making some plays on them. He looked like he was going to start. He had a mini stretch of consistency. And then he had that rib injury against the Chiefs. If I remember correctly, I'll have to look at the box scores for Epinesa week after week. But after that injury, he was never quite the same. We talked about Rousseau already with the foot injury. They have to stay healthy. And if they can stay healthy, I think one of them may be able to find that consistency that you're talking about, Matt.
So I just brought up the stats here. AJ Epinesa, career high 8 passes defensed pass bat downs at the line of scrimmage last season. That 8 tied his career high before last season, or his career total, I should say. So he had 8 in his first 3 seasons. He had 8 last season. So when you want to talk about affecting the game, yeah, you're right. That's something that we definitely have to talk about when it comes to AJ Epinesa. Only 12 in 3 seasons for Greg Rousseau. And that's something that I think we could talk about him doing a little bit more. In 3 seasons, though, Greg Rousseau has 17 sacks. In 4 seasons, AJ Epinesa has 15 and a half sacks. And I think that to me is where I'm looking at AJ Epinesa to take a step, take a run at a 10 sack season. I think to me that should be your floor for what you're able to do, especially if you're given a larger opportunity with Floyd gone and the snap count expected to go up. I mean, AJ Epinesa, all things considered, played 41% of the snaps last year. If that goes up to 50%, we could be really talking about a guy that's going to take a run at 10 plus sacks. And then we're talking about a different stratosphere in terms of next contract.
Yeah, and one or both of these players have a chance to see a rise or a decent rise in snap count with Leonard Floyd gone. And if someone doesn't step up in terms of that depth chart behind them, the rotation might not be as many looks for some of those bottom of the roster players. So it wouldn't shock me if Epinesa and or Rousseau see a slight boost in their snap counts this season.
Rousseau was at 60% last season, 585 snaps. How much do you think he goes up from that?
I mean, a few percentage points if you want to use Von Miller specifically. Let's just say that they want to make sure that Von Miller is fresh late in the season, late in games in general. Maybe you cut into his snaps a little bit. You have the loss of Leonard Floyd. A few percentage points, I suppose. I'm not going to say anything too drastic, but maybe get him closer to 625 in terms of snaps. You said 580 something?
Yeah.
Yeah, 625, 630, somewhere in that range.
I like it. I like where your head's at. Speaking of what I like hanging out with all of our Shout Buffalo Bills insiders over on the text line. Man, that thing is going to be rocking in 4 days here, Ryan, as we get into next week. The first 5 days when we have the first practice at St. John Fisher University. That thing is going to be fired up all day long throughout the day. Every update from training camp that I have is going to get sent out in the insider text line. And you can join by texting 716-528-6727 or going to joinsubtext.com/shoutbuffalobills. The Shout text line is brought to you by Carrie C. Beyer, attorney with the law offices of Francis M. Litro, located at 237 Main Street in Buffalo, New York. You can join too, buddy. If you or someone you know is seriously injured, give them a call, 716-852-1234, or check out litrolaw.com. The hype is real over there.
I think so. I think Reggie heard Owen knock into something upstairs, and now he's barking over here. So shout out to Owen up there. Shout out to the insider text line too, Matt. We launched this thing 1 year ago today. And also a happy anniversary to you. You've been now officially on the beat with Advance and Syracuse.com and NYApp.com for 6 years today. Oh, boy. I'm going to go pick him up, I think.
Oh, Reg, man. Thanks for the love, dude. He's giving me some shout-outs in the 6-year Annie. Yeah, man, it's flown by. I cannot believe I've been back for 6 years. The pod's been going now for 4 years. We are just we're cruising, man. This is it's what we love to do, and we're going to do a lot of it over the next couple of weeks as we get into training camp. Yeah. Where do you want to go next here? Do you want to go to the linebackers? Do you want to go to the defensive backs? Maybe we go linebackers next. And
yeah, linebackers. I think that's kind of an easy conversation. One of the best starting units in the league. I'm higher up on their depth than, I don't want to say others, but I'm very high up on their depth as well. I have big expectations for Dorian Williams as well. So I think that's kind of a good place to go.
He's chatty today. Reggie is, he's chatty. He's letting us know what he thinks. He agreed with Dad's take on the linebackers. John Robert over on Facebook says your dog has better things to say than some people. That's great. No, I'm with you there. I think the depth at the linebacker position is so solid, and it's so solid in the sense that you can be in a spot where you don't have to rush back Matt Milano. Like, you don't have to, you could sit back and watch what happened with Von Miller last year, take that into account as you're going into this year. You go out and you get veterans like Nicholas Morrow and Deion Jones, who I think, kind of replaced the veteran guys like Tyrell Dotson for a guy who was inexperienced on defense before last season, ended up being just invaluable in terms of his depth and what he offered. We've talked about Bale Inspector, but Dorian Williams in year 2, Eddie Ulafosho, who's like, to me, this year's version of Dorian Williams. You got 2 of those guys in the pipeline. You have a Bale Inspector who, although hasn't been able to stay healthy, has been now in the system for 3 years and has been in a couple of roster battles. I think you like what you have there. And at the top, Matt Milano and Terrell Bernard, as good of a combo as you can find in the league. Who do you think is more important to the other? Do you think Milano is more important to Bernard? Or do you think now Bernard, in this stage of Milano's career, where he's coming back from an injury, he's a little bit older, having a guy like Bernard, who by all accounts from last season was an upgrade of what they got from Tremaine Edmonds for those 4 years that he was here, could the third year linebacker be more important to the veteran?
I don't think either is more important to the other. I know that maybe is a cop-out answer, but we've already seen Matt Milano shine from the time that he came in his rookie season, was handed the reins at this job. I know he is coming off of a serious injury. He's 28 years old, if I'm remembering correctly. So he's older. He has a lot of experience. So if I were forced to pick one, I would say that maybe Bernard would be more important to him. But I just don't think that either is necessarily more important. We've seen Milano shine at that linebacker spot, regardless of who has been starting there opposite him. Obviously, Edmonds played a lot with him over the course of his career, but if Edmonds missed time or they needed someone out there, regardless of who it was, Milano always stepped up and looked like a star. And, last year, Terrell Bernard came out of nowhere. Missed some time late in training camp where that position was still up for grabs. We didn't know who was going to be starting opposite Matt Milano. And, lo and behold, he comes in and he just starts making plays from week 1 on for this Bills team. And when they lost Milano, there was a little bit of a learning curve for the defense as a whole, not just Terrell Bernard. They had a few struggles for a few weeks, but Bernard then kind of led that defense and was arguably their star player in that unit, making, interceptions, recovering fumbles, getting sacks. He was just all over the field and kind of like, how they described Kiko Alonso long ago, a guy that plays like his hair's on fire. He's everywhere. So I think both guys, they aren't dependent on one another, but having both on the field is going to really benefit the Bills this year.
Good buddy Pops Mafia, who I hope to see out at Dorado in a couple of weeks here. We'll obviously see him every day at training camp. He usually gets there early, gets himself a good spot. He said he would like to see the linebackers share snaps so that the Bills have them at the end of the year. And I think that's an interesting discussion because on the one hand, to me, that position is very predicated on chemistry, right? Like the lines of communication, having those snaps over time together, playing off of each other. It's really important. Now, at the same time, I think you could make the argument that, Tyrell Dotson comes in last season. He plays a little bit. Dorian Williams plays a little bit. Bernard obviously was the one stronghold for the most part of the season. AJ Klein comes back. He plays a little bit. So they were kind of moving some parts around. I think there could be something to that if you like Dorian Williams and you want to kind of play him for even like 3 series per game, or maybe give Terrell Bernard a series or 2 off and go with a veteran like Deion Jones or Nicholas Morrow. It's interesting. I just wonder how much the Bills coaching staff would be in on that, knowing how much they're trying to build that rapport between those 2 guys.
Build the rapport and know the importance of just every, in a close game especially, you might have faith in Dorian Williams, Deion Jones, Nicholas Morrow, these other guys that you brought in or guys that you drafted a year or 2 ago, like a Dorian Williams. But you want your best players out there in big moments. So it's a little bit tougher with that linebacker position, knowing all the ground that Milano can cover and Bernard can cover, the faith that you have in those 2 guys. I think Dorian Williams is in line to take a big step this year. Like I've already said before, we saw the year 1 to year 2 progression for Terrell Bernard. I expect that same type of progression from Dorian Williams. Obviously, you don't anticipate or hope he gets that same amount of reps this year that Bernard was able to benefit from. But I thought at times Dorian Williams looked a little bit lost out there as a rookie when he was given opportunities, just like Bernard did. And Bernard made huge strides going from that first year to second year. I like some of the depth pieces that they signed in free agency. You mentioned another day 3 linebacker pick that has some good athleticism, might start out as a special teams player, but can come in and grow here. And then obviously, Balin Spector, can he stay healthy? When he's been healthy, he's had some flashes, but health has been the biggest issue with him.
It's funny. I think Tremaine Edmonds can be used as another example of this front office and Brandon Beane specifically of going a certain direction early on in the build, realizing that maybe, I know that they'd say the right thing and say they didn't want to lose Tremaine Edmonds and that, the money was just the deal there. But I think the shift from Edmonds to Bernard was really forward thinking. Like, okay, we went this direction, this athletic freak, massive in the middle, a little bit like, non-typical of that position because of the mobility, the sideline to sideline at that size can be challenging. Although Tremaine Edmonds, that was one of his top skills. But like, to me, Bernard was a complete departure from that style of player. And it was right on the money. And I don't know who should get the credit for that. And maybe we'll never learn it, whether it was Sean McDermott and his crew, Brandon and his staff that kind of found him. I know McDermott knew Bernard's coach, so maybe that was a little bit of a help. But that tool set that he brought in, it reminds me of the shift that they had from receiver, right? Like those big, slower plotting receivers early on to the Smurfs, if you will, in 19 and 20. That was a storyline that we obviously talked a ton about. You need those kinds of decisions and pivots as an organization because sometimes I feel like organizations can get themselves in trouble when you're going to keep banging your head into the wall and say, no, we know this is going to work. We're just going to find the right player. Maybe this wasn't the right player. We're going to go the same kind of player, but just a different player. The Bills do a good job of just taking a complete departure from maybe what they were doing stylistic player wise and find a new style.
And I want to give credit to Bobby Babich as well. I mean, about a year ago at this time at training camp, he had one of his pressers and he was talking about the departure of Tremaine Edmonds and, who's going to get that job. And he talked about, in his mind, he was going to go into camp without looking at the size of these players. He wanted to look and see who can do job A, B, C, and D, check the boxes of moving around the field, covering, tackling, this, I would love to actually pull up the quote if I can find it. But he talked about it. He didn't want to go into camp in his mind in terms of it has to be a guy that had size like Edmonds. It had to be someone that mimicked his play. He went in with an open mind saying that he was going to go in without, almost like closing his eyes saying, I'm not looking at a guy to mimic what Edmonds was in terms of that freakish size, because guys like that don't grow on trees. Edmonds was a special type of player, athlete, I guess is the best way to put it, because as a player, it didn't necessarily transition over as well as the Bills probably thought. But he even went in with an open mind last year. And you're right. You look at where they ended up with Terrell Bernard and the fact that he was a much different player in terms of size and stature. And yet the results were probably better than any year that Milano and Edmonds teamed up in terms of the linebacker play.
Final thing on the linebackers before we switch gears into the defensive backs. Matt Milano. We talked about like the approach that the Bills could use. What are your expectations for him this season? Do we get to the end of the year when we're doing those podcasts in February and March, and are we talking about Matt Milano returning to form and being the player that he was before? Does he not get all the way back? Like, what's your expectations for him this season?
It's a great question. I don't know what my expectations are because the Bills were so mysterious and rightfully so about the injury in terms of they didn't give much. The only thing we knew all last season was he's not coming back. He's not coming back for the playoffs. Sean McDermott made that crystal clear. When after the draft was over and they had that meeting with the Bills fans, they talked about how it was an injury that they had never seen before. And they were going to trust the team doctors and the staff to bring him along. but I think we saw more out of him in the spring than maybe you and I were anticipating, being on the field
Yeah.
and working a little bit. So I don't know, what the rehab, what the recovery really looked like. And maybe Matt Milano, who's a man of few words, maybe he will shed some light on that this summer. So I'm not sure in terms of, is this something where he'll ever bounce back? Will he come right back and look like the player of old? Because this isn't like, an ACL injury necessarily, or things where it takes a year to recover. We don't know everything, all the details of what he went through. So until then, I'm not sure. I think that he might not necessarily be at the same level that he once was at the start of the year. But I still think Matt Milano at 75% is better than a lot of options out there across the league. And you have Bernard to pick up the slack. So I'm in kind of wait and see mode in terms of what he looks like at training camp here starting next week.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see how quickly it takes him to get back worked into the drills, just because, like, the part of Matt Milano's game that, to me, if it decreases at all in terms of effectiveness, is like his ability to shoot gaps, his ability to react and explode. Like that to me is what makes him such a special player at his size, especially playing on the boundary like he does most of the time. In coverage, I think that he's so savvy at, like, the way that he goes about playing the position. It's just that his ability to rush the quarterback, his ability to, get tackles around the line of scrimmage. If he's not operating in the same way that he was before in that area, I have a level of concern, because I thought that was one of the things that Tyrod Dotson did at such a high level that really helped mitigate the loss of Milano. Now, especially in the run game, like, Dotson was great in the run game. And I think Milano, that was what I thought that they were going to really miss. Now, here's the other side of that, though, with Matt Milano. I don't know if I've met somebody in the 6 years I've covered professional football that lives and breathes the grind and the work of it all like he does. Like,
Right.
He's not interested in the fanfare. He's not interested in the media headlines and the razzle dazzle, the glitz and the glam, the lights, and all the extra stuff. That's not Matt Milano. He is all about, on Sunday, between the white lines, he has that just drive for the game that I think that when you have that, it gives you the best chance to get back and be the guy that you were before. It's kind of a little bit why I'm not ruling out Von Miller being a version of the player that he was before, maybe what he was in 2022, but if not, maybe close.
Yeah, and that's fair. And a guy like Matt Milano is wired differently than a lot of guys in this league. And I'm not saying a lot of guys in this league are looking for fame and fortune, but some certainly are. Matt Milano is as simplistic in terms of his lifestyle. We've heard about that. He's not someone that is going to be pulling up to camp in some flashy car. He is there to do work. He's going to be doing that work, I'm sure, in the meeting room. And in terms of what we see on the field, that'll be fun to monitor and to share with the Bills fans on a day-by-day basis at camp.
What have you been watching Receiver on Netflix?
I have not.
So I've been watching it a little bit. I really highly recommend people check it out, because I think one of the conversations that you have is, like, all these receivers are making so much money. I mean, Devontae Adams, Deebo Samuel, Justin Jefferson. And, like, from the outside looking in, like, you look at, like, I was talking about a guy like Brandon Ayuk and, like, some of the interviews that he did that I just didn't like. And, that's part of the game to a degree. I think you see a guy like Justin Jefferson who wears the chains and the sunglasses and the swag, and maybe you just judge that a little bit. And then you see behind, even if it's subconsciously, then you see behind the scenes and you see the drive and the work ethic and what it means to him. And when he hurt his hamstring, I'm on that episode, and the reaction to it and the fight to get back from it. It's like, it's such a cool peek behind the scenes that really humanizes these guys. And to me, I could just imagine what a linebacker show chronicling the year of rehab of Matt Milano would be like. It would probably be just like a crazy watch because of how driven he is.
Yeah, absolutely. And we heard, he was rehabbing and working hard all year, and he was in Buffalo and doing this, that, and the other. So I'm sure it would be just like that. He was someone that you didn't see very often, but you knew he was there. You knew he was doing everything in his power to get back. So I'm excited for him. I hope he does look like the player he was pre-injury, and hopefully we'll learn a little bit more about that rehab process and the work that had to go into it.
All right, let's make the transition here to our final position group of the podcast, and we are going to get into the defensive back group. And, to start, Ryan, I feel like there's two different camps when you're looking at the cornerback position. Like, obviously take Teron Johnson out of it because I feel like he's almost in his own position group, right? Like outside of the boundary guys, he's so good. He's so reliable. He's been so healthy. And if you're a Bills fan, you're like, knock on all the wood that you can find. But I'm super high on Douglas and Christian Benford, Rasul Douglas, Christian Benford. But you made a point of this in the insider text line. It's like beyond that, there's not a lot of established veteran guys. And I think that's by design. I think they want to give Kaiir Elam every opportunity to either be the main guy off of the bench or potentially even to push one of these guys for a starting job or maybe a timeshare at the position. We'll see what that ends up looking like. That could also be something like I have concerns about Douglas and Benford staying healthy long-term. Maybe that means Benford, the best path is Benford and Elam kind of splitting time for a while. We'll see what that ends up looking like. But beyond that, Jamarcus Ingram, and then a whole bunch of guys that, we're going to learn a lot about over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. I think that by the end of training camp or at some point during the preseason, I wouldn't be shocked if the Bills made a move at cornerback. And, I've had some insiders and I've had people ask me, what about a reunion with Stephon Gilmore? I don't see Gilmore coming back to Buffalo unless there was an injury to one of their starters. Gilmore is not the same player that he used to be, but I still think he's a starter in this league somewhere, and he's waiting for an opportunity like that. But I think there are guys, one, that are still sitting at home right now that you could potentially bring in. Two, there's going to be players across the league that could be cut due to new coaching regimes, due to their salary caps. I think this is one position where they try to bolster their depth with some of that money that they have remaining or sitting here now in terms of their remaining cap space, because you said it best. I love the starting trio of cornerbacks. Rasul Douglas last year came in and he said that he leaned a lot on Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer to know what his responsibilities were or to tell him where to be. And he was probably being a little bit humble in that regard too, because I think he came in and he learned the playbook pretty quickly. But opposing quarterbacks were only, I think they had like 44 point something rating when they threw at Rasul Douglas in Buffalo last year. His rating was much higher, much worse off when it was in Green Bay. This system, he fit into it very well. He played his role really well. I actually have it right here. Target opponents had a QB rating of 44.2 when targeting him per Doug Farrar in a Sporting News article that he just put out this week. He was great. He had 4 interceptions in the short stint with Buffalo. He's had 9 over the last 2 years, third most in the league. He's a ball hawk. And with the whole offseason to learn this playbook, I think Douglas, he's going to have another great season. Christian Benford's a guy that we might be talking about as a true number one cornerback if he can stay healthy. But like you said, after that, what are we going to get from this cornerback position? What are we going to get from this unit? You mentioned that Jamil Adai was kind of closely linked to Kaiir Elam this spring in terms of working with him, trying to coach him up probably. And Elam has had moments of brilliant play. The interception in the regular season a few years ago against Kansas City. The interception in the playoffs last year against Pittsburgh. One against the Dolphins as well that he's had in his career. It's the over-aggressive play, though. It's the penalties. It's the looking lost in coverage last year. I believe it was Kelvin Ridley that kind of had him in the spin cycle a few times in that Jacksonville game when he had to be out there. That's the part where, okay, did he learn from this? Is he going to take that next step? The opportunities haven't been there for him in terms of in the regular season. He's had opportunities to win the job at training camp. And things like that. He lost out to Benford. I don't want to make it seem like he hasn't gotten opportunities to win the job. He has, but in terms of a regular season play, it's been limited because of the health of the cornerbacks, the play of the cornerbacks when they've been out there. They haven't needed him to play much. But you don't know what you're going to get from him. This is, we've talked about how guys like Chase Claypool, it's their last chance in this league. it's not Kyrie Elam's last chance in this league, but this is probably his last chance with the Bills, Matt. If it doesn't happen this year, why would you keep him around? Why wouldn't you move on from him at the cornerback position? And I don't know if you would tinker with the idea of even trying him at safety or anything like that, but it's a huge year for him in terms of his depth. And then Jamarcus Ingram. Ingram's done a nice job when opportunities have been presented to him. I've noted that Miami game a few years ago where everyone was dropping like flies with injuries and due to the heat there, hamstrings and cramping. He came in and you didn't notice him on the field in terms of being out of place against the likes of Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill and some other really good quality wide receivers. But it's a small sample size. And then after that, there's some UDFAs that have opportunities. There's some versatile pieces. But then there's guys like Daquan Hardy, who I think is solely a nickel cornerback. So he's just there to kind of be a reserve for Taron Johnson, compete maybe with Cam Lewis for that job. There are guys where, they have specified roles. I'm not sure the Bills have enough boundary talent right now, and it's a need they have to address here sooner rather than later.
Putting out some fires upstairs real quick. Thanks for stretching that out a little bit. Very nice. We're good now. So you look at the cornerback position. You talked about maybe bringing in somebody else before the end of the season or for the end of the preseason. There's some names out there. You mentioned Stephon Gilmore, Patrick Peterson, somebody who I think could be interesting because 34 years old. I mean, he played multiple positions last year. He's somebody that can be just like, in the background, maybe help bring along some of your younger guys. And then an opportunity comes up if there's an injury. Other than that, though, Xavier Howard, I think he's probably going to want a starting role somewhere. Adoree Jackson, maybe some. Go ahead.
Didn't Peterson say that the Bills were in contact with him a year or two ago before he re-signed with Pittsburgh?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, they've had talks before. At this age, at this point in his career, I think he knows he's not a clear-cut starter anymore. Like you said, he'd be more open to a job like that. And, you mentioned a few shows ago, we're closing the door on the Josh Norman reunions. But Norman, to his credit, did a nice
I don't think we should ever close the door on that. I think that he could be 45 years old and just somehow end up back on this
roster. Sign Josh Norman. No, but Norman did do a nice job in terms of in the locker room. And I think coaching some of these guys up, trying to help them. He was someone that was near Kyrie Elam a lot last year, probably keeping him up emotionally in terms of not letting him get down. So veterans like that do serve a role. But I also think there are some guys, and I don't have a list in front of me right now, that could be cap casualties before the start of the regular season based on who teams drafted, based on, like I said, changes in their schemes defensively. So there's going to be opportunities for the Bills to address that position.
All right, let's move to the safety position, close this thing down. Maybe one of the greatest unknowns of this 2024 roster is what's going to end up happening at safety. I mean, I could probably come up with 3 different combinations right now and give you a strong argument for why that ends up being the starting unit when the season begins. I think that the person that who's going to be involved, but also has an uphill climb to a starting job right off the jump is Cole Bishop. I'm not ruling it out, but it just seems like it's a lot on his plate to go from, his understanding of the defense, what he did in college, and asking him over the course of 4 months to get up to speed fast enough to be a guy that they rely upon to do what, Jordan Poyer was doing and Micah Hyde was doing all those years. Taylor Rapp's going to probably have one of those jobs. I'm pretty confident in that. And then beyond that, I think Mike Edwards probably, is in the lead in terms of making a run at that other spot just because he's been in the league so long. He's played in multiple systems. He can get up to speed probably pretty quickly. But I think that there's limitations to that spot too. So I think if you're the Bills, you want Cole Bishop to assume or to work his way into that job. But I think that's a big ask. I still think the wild card in all of this is DeMar Hamlin.
Yeah. So first of all, Cole Bishop is a complete safety. He can play all over the box. He can play deep. He can play anywhere that you want him to play. But like you said, it's the learning curve. It's learning the system, getting comfortable with this system. The Bills haven't had anyone be a liability at the safety position in terms of starters because they've had Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. And I'm not saying Cole Bishop week 1 would be a liability, but there'd be some unknowns. There might be some issues in terms of being out of position because of a, something on his end where he thought he was supposed to be somewhere else. I think that slow playing him, not, getting him some reps in a game where you blitz with him, where you use him in certain situations, but you're not giving him that starting job is an okay way to bring him along. And then by mid-season, then he's maybe one of your starters. So I agree with you on that. Bishop has the talent and the ability to be a day one starter, but we're going to have to see at training camp how he looks compared to those other safeties. Mike Edwards, who they signed in free agency, he was a reserve safety in KC last year until they had an injury. And when he came in, he played pretty well, and he obviously played for a great defensive coordinator in KC. So he's a smart player, someone that I think that's probably something that Sean McDermott coveted in a Mike Edwards. So wouldn't shock me if he's a starter and someone that could lose his job over the course of the season, but he has that ability. And Taylor Rapp's really interesting to me in that I thought he was a little reckless at times last season. Tries to make those big hits where it sometimes harms him. It can lead to flags, can lead to injuries. I thought he played smarter as the season went on, and it was no coincidence that based on PFF grading, I know Pro Football Focus isn't everyone's cup of tea. Out of his 4 highest graded games last season, 3 of them were in the final 3 weeks of the regular season. He got an understanding of this system, and he got more comfortable over time, and he played really well. And that's probably why the Bills made it a priority to re-sign him as a free agent this year. So I agree with you. Rapp is one of the starters. I think Mike Edwards has a good chance to be the other. Damar Hamlin, though, had a really good spring. And, I know there's going to be some eye rolling from the Bills fans out there. Last year, there was a lot of fans saying, he was only on this roster because of what happened. He was on this roster last year because he earned that last safety job. And I think he's on this roster this year because right now he is their clear cut, at worst, number 4 safety. He's played a lot of valuable reps. Last year, he came back from cardiac arrest, something where I think the Bills didn't know how to bring him back in terms of the usage. I think he didn't know how to necessarily come back from that in terms of how he should be playing, how much he should be playing. But he looked really good in the spring. He knows the system more than any other safety on this roster currently because he's been in the system longer than anyone else. He has things that are in his advantage and working in his favor. So could he come into training camp, build off of his spring, and maybe force the Bills' hand a little bit? I 100% think it's a possibility. I think the top 4, though, those 4 names that we've just mentioned, are your clear-cut guys. A guy like D. Delaney faces an uphill battle. You have a Cam Lewis who I don't have him listed as a safety. He's more of that nickel cornerback that can play safety, that can play outside corner in a pinch. You have guys like that. We have the old train horn coming through here. It is clearly football season. But I really, think that those 4 safeties are set right now. I see in the comments Justin Simmons. Simmons did say he wants to play for a contender. The Bills would fit that job description. I just don't know if the money will ever match up from Buffalo's end. And by the way, the Bills have I think a Micah Hyde lying in wait if the opportunity presents itself that he could come back as well and stabilize this position if need be.
I think that's all really well said. I think we could probably even close on that. I'll just add one thing in. I'm not closing the door on Cam Lewis at safety and, him working in at some point in camp, especially if they got through the spring program and weren't like super pumped about whether it be Edwards' availability, whether it be Bishop's kind of time it's taking him to kind of get up to speed. If we come out early on in training camp and we see Cam Lewis out there at safety, it wouldn't shock me. And this is a guy that, played some snaps for them at different times. I mean, we all remember the Justin Jefferson play. I know a lot of people, kind of remember that when they think about Cam Lewis as a safety. But they signed him to a 2-year deal. He could do multiple things. And you mentioned it, Daquan Hardy might be assuming that top backup slot cornerback job. Maybe Cam Lewis gets really into the mix at the safety spot.
It's definitely a possibility. I don't know if comparing him to a defensive Ryan Bates. Obviously, Bates was a guy last year that didn't see a lot of playing time, but I thought maybe his versatility cost him a little bit because he could play all across the line. Because Cam Lewis can play just about anywhere in a pinch, maybe I hope that doesn't go against him in terms of his chances if the Bills are looking for other options.
All right, that's going to do it for this episode of the Shout Buffalo Bills Football Podcast. Ryan, the time is ticking down. We're almost there. St. John Fisher University training camp begins in a couple of days. We'll have you covered with a bunch of stuff. Don't forget, tomorrow, another episode of the live show will be streaming from MafiaCon, 1:15 p.m. We cannot wait for that one. It is going to be awesome. Make sure you, if you're there, come say hi. If not, watch it live at 1:15 for Ryan. I'm Matt. We'll see you then. Take care, everybody.